Different countries taking different approaches on the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Austria reinstating a lockdown today, but only for the unvaxxed. In America, over 80 million affected under President Biden's vaccine mandate for companies with more than 100 employed. So what has people willing to lose their jobs rather than getting a jab? We went to the Global COVID Summit on Faith and Health in Missouri over the weekend to hear from doctors and frontline professionals on their reasons. Tune into Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. There seems to be a growing divide between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. Different countries taking different approaches. Austria reinstating a lockdown today, but only for the unvaxxed. According to the New York Times, it is considered one of the first national lockdowns that specifically targets the unvaccinated. Latvia is banning lawmakers who are unvaxxed from doing their jobs. They are not allowed to participate in discussions or vote on legislation. They are also getting pay-docked for being unvaxxed. As for the U.S., questions remain. President Biden mandated that businesses with 100 or more employees either enforce a vaccine mandate or have the unvaccinated get tested weekly. But after a federal appeals court blocked it temporarily, businesses and employees are milling around in confusion. The three-judge panel wrote that the mandate likely violates the constitutional structure that safeguards our collective liberty. The appellate court's ruling added that the mandate was staggeringly overbroad. Under Biden's mandate, over 80 million Americans are affected. That's over half of the U.S. workforce, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So what has people willing to lose their jobs rather than getting a jab? We went to the Global COVID Summit on Faith and Health in Missouri over the weekend to hear from doctors and frontline professionals on their reasons. So to kick off, let's hear from Dr. Amerling, MD, a New York native who's a nephrology specialist, which focuses on the kidney functions. He has since moved to Florida to continue practicing. Let's play part of his speech.
I've been asking myself the question, why did so few doctors stand up and push back against what's going on? This is alarming. How did all this happen? What happened to the medical profession? Where are they?
He traces it back to the introduction of guidelines into medicine, saying nowadays doctors are no longer allowed to practice medicine. Instead, they follow guidelines, which means instead of pulling from their own experience and changing the diagnosis based on each patient, now doctors just check boxes and follow what the guidelines say. So what is his solution?
We use science, logic, deductive reasoning, judgment, and clinical experience. This is how we used to practice medicine, okay? And we had very good results.
So what are some of those results? To begin with, it involves the debate around hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, which the FDA called the livestock drug. Back in 2015, ivermectin won the Nobel Prize for being highly effective in both animals and humans in killing parasites. As for hydroxychloroquine, Dr. Amerling said,
you know, when Zelenko started to talk about hydroxychloroquine and Trump started to talk about it, the critics like Fauci said, these treatments aren't evidence-based. Well, when you have seen patients who are literally on death's door get better after you give them a drug, you don't need a randomized controlled trial. You really do not. But we're being told that one size fits all. And that is the conceit of evidence-based medicine, that you can come up with a guideline that will apply to everybody.
That message of one size fits all traces back to Marxism and communism. Special guest Dr. Yanli Meng, medical doctor and virologist and independent coronavirus expert, spoke on the current landscape in the United States.
So mandate is another very useful tool for Marxism, communism ideology, which we Chinese people are very familiar with. They use mandate, they use it to divide America. No matter it's mandate mask, mandate lockdown, or mandate vaccine, there are always people separate into pro-mandate or against the mandate. And this will cause chaos in America.
Now for some background on Dr. Yan. She was educated at two top medical schools in China, Southern Medical University and Central South University. She was also a postdoctoral fellow in the School of Public Health at the University of Hong Kong. She escaped Hong Kong on April 28, 2020. Since then, she's been interviewed 4 times by the FBI, including an FBI neurologist, and each time she has been deemed credible. Her story goes back to December 2019. Let's take a look.
At that day, I was assigned by my boss, the WHO reference lab supervisor, Dr. Liu Peng at the University of Hong Kong, to conduct some confidential investigation about the new virus outbreak in Wuhan. And all the information I collected, I fed back to them. I see there is no response. And my investigation kept going on.
Dr. Yan decided to speak up by giving information to Chinese independent influencer Lu De. Her message consisted of 4 parts. 1, that the CCP was actively covering up the cases. There were only 62 confirmed cases at that time. 2nd, that there was human-to-human transmission. 3rd, that there is no animal intermediary host. And 4th, that if not stopped, it could lead to a pandemic. After this message was released,
within 4 hours, Chinese government has to admit that the case number is triple, raised to 198, and soon after, they admit that there are more cases out of Wuhan.
the rest, they say, is history. So what about what the vaccine does to the body? Dr. Richard Fleming touched on that issue. He studied first saline, then the Pfizer vaccine, and the effect it has on red blood cells.
No damage to the color cells. They stay vibrant red. They don't clump together.
Next, he looks at what happens when the Pfizer vaccine enters the blood system.
You can see the cells, those aren't red anymore. This is less than a minute of Pfizer-BioNTech being added to human red blood cells. The color is gone. The oxygen has been stripped from these red blood cells. And as you watch it, you will start to see little clumping.
He decided to try and figure out why that was.
Because we know this is true. Lipid nanoparticles merge with with membranes of cells, including red blood cells, changing the structure of the membrane of the red blood cell, changing what's in it and its function. And it's permanent and it's irreversible.
And what about the naysayers?
If I'm wrong, prove me wrong. Prove Dr. McCarran and myself wrong.
And according to the event page, this alliance of scientists and physicians is 13,000 strong. And they have 3 main takeaways. Number 1, don't vaccinate the kids. Number 2, for those who are COVID recovered, not to get the shot. And number 3, for those who do get the virus, to get early treatment, because early treatment saves lives. So these are some strong statements. Let's hear from some of the doctors on why they feel this way.
Do not vaccinate our children. Hard stop. Why is that? What is the infection fatality rate in children? 0.1 per 100,000, 5 to 11, 0.1 per 100,000. So let's look at the numbers. There's 28 million kids, 5 to 11. If everything was perfect, we'd save 28 kids. If everything was perfect. But as you heard, how many kids have already had the virus? Probably 50% or more. So that's 14 kids. Everything would have to be perfect to save 14 children. And that just doesn't make sense. Right? Then I saw the hands. How many people are COVID recovered? You don't need a vaccine. You don't need a vaccine.
And on the issue of vaccines versus natural immunity.
When you have natural immunity, COVID recovered, you form antibodies in your tears, your boogers, your throat, your mucus. It's called IgA. When you get a shot in your muscle, you don't form that. And so you have this IgA secreted that binds the virus and mops it like that. Now, there's a handful of people in our society that are IgA deficient. Some people should get tested for that. If you get the vaccine, you don't have that IgA protection. If you've had COVID, you do.
So instead of lockdowns and masks, what would these doctors have recommended?
What's the #1 risk for poor outcomes in COVID? Bingo. Obesity. Okay, public health message #2, it's uncomfortable. We don't want to shame anybody. Instead of saying, everybody lock down, lock down, lock down, it should have been, everybody get outside, move, and lose 5 pounds. Instead of gaining the COVID 20 or 30 that most of us did.
He argues the best defense to boost one's immune system through exercise, getting plenty of vitamin D, and getting enough sleep. So why does Dr. Cole and these other doctors care?
What I care about is your humanity, and that's my calling as a physician, because I took a Hippocratic oath. And that's to first do no harm. But what are they doing to us? They're doing financial harm, they're doing psychological harm, and physical harm. And to withhold treatment from a patient, that's malfeasance. That's also physical harm.
Now, many of the doctors aren't necessarily against the vaccine per se, but what they are against is the lack of informed consent that happens under the mandate. They see this as a breach of medical and constitutional law.
The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Biological Weapons Convention Treaty, and multiple others, is written into it that informed consent is a requirement. You cannot mandate people take anything when that negates the informed consent.
So now that we've heard from some of the doctors, what about the attendees? Former media producer of Christian Ministry, Heidi Cancellieri, said,
doctors need to be empowered to practice, not mandated by government about how to practice. They can't be controlled by, like big pharma and stuff like that.
And Darren Ross, with the podcast Patriots with Grit, says,
I think people need to turn to God. They need to pray a lot. They need to turn off the mainstream media. Just turn off the nonsense and turn on the common sense.
So those were some examples from doctors, healthcare professionals, and particularly people of faith on their reasons for risking the loss of a job over getting the jab. And now before we end, Snoopy is heading to the moon. NASA says it will be sending up a stuffed toy of Peanut Snoopy as a part of the Artemis 1 moon mission. NASA astronaut Snoopy, as they will call him, will serve as a zero-gravity indicator. For his trip, Snoopy will be outfitted in a custom orange flight suit, complete with gloves, boots, and a NASA patch. The Artemis 1 mission is scheduled in early 2022. Under Artemis, NASA is working to land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon and lead the next steps of human exploration for future missions to Mars. And this isn't new for Snoopy. He's been helping out with NASA missions for more than 50 years now. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning into Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.